Okay friends, it's time to get started on our job. Let's make our way right up here to the mirror switch. For this, I'm going to carefully use a small flathead screwdriver. You want to get in between the door panel and the switch assembly itself. We'll just carefully press in there, and then we'll gently pry this out of position. Now once you have it popped out of there, you're going to have to grab onto this, and we're going to start tilting it downward like this to roll it out of position. Now let's make our way to the bottom of the switch. Right here, you're going to find an electrical connector. We're just going to carefully get in between this area, gently separate it, and go ahead and pull out the wiring. After you have it disconnected, just go ahead and take a peek. If you see any funny colors, it's probably corrosion and it would need to be dealt with. There it is, friends. Now to gain access to this, let's go ahead and use a plastic trim tool. We're going to carefully remove this lower panel right here. Just wedge this in here, can pop that out of position. Go ahead and carefully slide that out. We'll give it a quick inspection. Continuing with our small trim tool, let's carefully get under this area. Just going to gently pop that up. Now for over on this area, you're actually going to have to come under here. There's a little tab. I'm just going to go ahead and press on that. I'm going to pull it towards the front of the door. As I'm doing that, I'm going to lift this up. There we are. Now we can go ahead and turn this over and we can start disconnecting our wiring harnesses. Pay attention to where each of them are. In case you forget, it's not a big deal because they are all a little different, so you really can't mix them up. For each of these, you're going to find a little rectangular tab, pretty much where my index finger is. You just want to go ahead and squeeze on that, and then you can pull each of them out. Give it a quick inspection. Continue on. If you find that you can't squeeze them, you can also carefully pry. Just enough pressure to get it to break free. This one's a little bit harder to get to. It's right in this corner. Now that we have this out of the way, we can continue on to our 5.5mm screw. We'll set that aside. Moving along the bottom of the door panel, you're going to find two more 5.5mm screws. Go ahead and remove the pair. Okay, so at this point, we can continue on by carefully lifting up on the door panel. But before we do so, you want to make sure you pay attention to all of your wiring. Make sure as we're lifting this up and pulling it away from the door, you're not putting a tug on the wiring in any way. Let's go ahead and remove that door panel from the door. With the door panel out of the way, the next thing we want to do is move along to the weather barrier. That's this entire gray area. We're just going to carefully get behind it, so let's peel it away from the door. You're going to want to reuse this weather barrier, so don't rip it. Let's go ahead and set this up and aside. So let's go ahead and bring down the window a little bit, and we're going to be watching in this area right here. Before we go ahead and move it though, I want to mention, do not stick your fingers in here and try to function the window in any way. Now that we have this brought down, this is the area that we want to pay attention to. You're going to find that you have a rivet on the rear side of this. We're going to go ahead and drill that. And then you're also going to find that you're going to have another one over on this side. This side's a little bit harder to get to, and we'll get to it in a minute. Now with that said, let's go ahead and turn the key into the off position. We'll continue on by removing this rivet first. If you don't want to use a drill because it might be a little bit hard to drill this out, you can also use a cutting wheel. There's a couple things you want to be careful of. You've got some wiring. And you of course also have a cable and a rod. You don't want to damage any of it. So whatever you need to move, go ahead and get it out of the way. Now we can continue on with a hammer and punch, drive out the rest of that rivet. Be very careful because we're dealing with glass. Now once you have that separated, we can move along over to this side. For this, what you're going to want to do is put the key back in the on position, and we're going to bring it down so we can access the rivet through this hole right here. As you can tell, it's going to be a little bit harder to fit the cutting wheel inside there. That's more of a drill it type of situation. Let's use a hammer and punch and get the rest of the rivets out of here. Be very careful. Once again, we're dealing with glass. The next thing we're going to do is carefully grab onto the window, slide it up into the fully upright position. We're going to go ahead and tape it there so it can't fall down on us. The more tape, the merrier. Obviously, you want to put a whole bunch of strips on here. Tape is a lot cheaper than a window. Once you're sure the window is secure, we can move along to finishing removing the window regulator. Let's move along to this area here. You can see we have a wire that's mounted directly to the regulator. Continue on with your trim tool. We'll go ahead and pop that out of place. Now let's move along to the motor wiring. For that, there's a little tab. You can squeeze it. We'll pull this off. Give it a quick inspection. We can set that aside. Let's use a 10mm socket to remove this nut. Now we can switch to an 11mm socket. You're going to find that you have 4 mounting nuts. One here, one there. We'll make our way down and then over. Remove all 4. I'm going to start with the lower ones. Let's grab onto the assembly and get ready to start removing it. I'm going to start right here. We're just going to push this out of placement. You can watch those studs slide right out of their holes. Now we're going to try to grab onto both sides of the window regulator at the same time. Try to keep them as close as possible. We're going to try to work it right out through this area. Be very careful for your wiring as you remove this. With the window regulator out of the vehicle, we're going to continue on to removing the motor from it. To do that, you're going to find 3 T30 Torx head screws. Now we can lift this up off of here. There it is, friends. Now we can get ready to install our motor on our window regulator assembly. Let's go ahead and carefully put that in position, lining up all 3 of our mounting bolt holes. After that, you can start in all 3 of your mounting bolts. Once they're all started, go ahead and snug them up. Now let's get this into the vehicle. Now we can get this back inside the door. We're just going to go ahead and condense it. And now we'll slide it right on into position. Once again, we're being very careful for any type of cables or even wiring as we do this. Now we'll take the forward beam, put it in place. Let's watch for those studs coming out through their mounting holes. Now that we have that up there, let's go ahead and start on one of our mounting nuts. Line up the bottom hole as well. As you line up the bottom stud, you also want to be paying attention to your corner stud. All right, let's put in our mounting nuts. The 11mm nut goes down here. And then the only 10mm headed nut is going to go right here. Let's make our way over to the other side now. Now we can tighten all of them. Now we're going to reach inside, grab onto it, and give it a wiggle. You want to make sure everything's nice and secure. Now we can go ahead and plug in our window motor. Listen for a click. Give it a tug. You want to make sure it's nice and secure. Now we're going to start putting our cables back in place. Let's plug in that electrical connector. Make sure it's secure. Hold on to that window and start getting ready to lower it down. As we're bringing it down, you want to make sure that it sits directly on top of that window regulator. Along the forward side, and along the back side. Bring this down as straight as possible. Now at this point, you should see that your mounting holes line up perfectly. To mount this back in, you can either use rivets or you can use a nut and a bolt for each. Now for me personally, I'm just going to go ahead and use some mounting bolts. You just want to find one that can fit through that hole and it's long enough to make it all the way through, and then of course you're going to want to make sure you put a nut on. It's easiest if you take the bolts and you come through from the back side and then put the nut on the forward side. Make sure you have a wrench that can hold the bolt. Put our nut on there. Before you tighten this side, go ahead and make sure you do the exact same thing on the other side. Once they're both on there, you can go ahead and snug them up. Now before we go any further, let's go ahead and put the key in the on position. We're going to test the window functionality. I want to make sure it makes its way all the way up and all the way down. Alright, assuming it works perfectly, go ahead and turn off your key power. Now at this point, you're just going to want to double check everything. Make sure that you tightened everything as needed and you didn't leave anything inside the door. Now we can go ahead and take this and we're going to put it back in position. You just want to stick it back into the original position that you removed it from. You can tell that there's holes where the door panel needs to slide into. Everything needs to be lined up perfectly. Now it's time to install our door panel. Looking at the back side of it, you remember you had all the little hooks. Each one of those hooks needs to fit into its area on the door. Also, looking at the door, we have a lot of wiring. You want to make sure you have that in the proper positioning as we slide this into place. Let's go ahead and take the door panel and we're going to go ahead and put it up near the door. At the same time, I'm going to go ahead and grab onto the wiring and put it into its proper position. The 3 wires come up through here, and then also you need to make sure you grab onto that mirror wiring. Slide that right up through there. Now we'll just come up nice and high, slide it in while we're pressing it up against the door. We're going to try to line up all of our hooks. Once it feels as though they're slid in, you can go ahead and lock this down. Feel all the way around. You want to make sure it's completely situated up against the door. If it seems like it's pushed away, you might have missed one of the hooks. Assuming that feels good, let's continue on with our mounting bolt. Let's reconnect our wiring for the switches. The top is going to be green, then blue, then gray. Start with the lower one. Now we can bring this down in position and we're going to try to lock it in. Now we can reinstall this. Looking at the back side, you can see that we have several little push tabs. Let's go ahead and pull on that handle a little bit. We'll slide this into position. Now we can latch it in. Time to install the mirror switch. Let's go ahead and reconnect in the electrical connector. Listen for a click, give it a tug. Now we're going to go ahead and start putting this in here. You remember when we removed it, we had to roll it a little bit. So let's start in that rolled position, aiming downward. We'll go ahead and slide it right in here. Carefully press it. Now we can start bringing it into the proper position and press it in. Make sure it's nice and secure.